Cone 6. Hi, I'm Kent. If you've been following along, I've been slowly working on rebuilding my kiln. The first couple times I fired my kiln, I had an underfire, didn't quite get up to temperature, and there were some problems with the temperature sensor board. Then I fired it again and I went way over temperature. There were a few things I thought may be wrong and I needed to dig into them. So this here is a Cone 6 cone that managed to bend over. Unfortunately, I didn't get Cone 6 all automatically, and that's the whole point of putting in the automatic system that I did. I want the Raspberry Pi and the control software to be able to ramp the temperature up. When I was firing it this time, I saw a few more things that I wanted to check out. I added some extra debug statements to the software. One of my suspicions was that the internal temperature of the chip was getting too hot. This chip itself will compensate for the ambient temperature as well as measuring the temperature from the thermocouple. I was worried that inside of my control box it might be getting too hot and throwing off the calibration. So I started printing out that temperature and it seemed to be doing okay. It's getting warm, but not that much over ambient, so I doubted that was the problem. I was also getting some weird readings from the temperature sensor. I thought maybe I needed to reset it, so I changed the program and basically every minute reset the temperature. However, when I did this last firing, I was still seeing some weirdnesses coming out of the temperature reading, so resetting it wasn't the problem either. I was getting some errors from the temperature sensor. Previously, I talked about the kiln software disconnecting. So I tracked that down. What was actually happening was there's two different parts of the software looking for errors from the temperature sensor. One of them will count for a certain number of errors, and after it has had too many, it will stop. The other one was only looking for one error, and it would stop. And there was a race condition. Basically, they were both trying to check that. So I fixed that in the software. So looking closely at the temperature readings as they were going up, and it was getting close to the top firing temperature, around 2000 degrees, the temperature actually started bouncing up and down quite a bit. And I thought maybe this was normal. I was looking in the software and there was some filtering, so it will take a running average of the temperature readings. There's also something in there around 50 hertz noise cancellation. I had the key insight when I stopped the kiln at full temperature. When I did that, I noticed the temperature immediately jumped up. I was like, that's not right. The temperature wouldn't change just for me stopping the kiln. I went digging through the software and there was nothing connecting the temperature reading to actually stopping the software from the web UI. Those are totally separate. The temperature reading was basically coming straight off the sensor. So I had no idea what was going on. Eventually I realized this is probably a hardware problem, not a software problem. When this was only happening at very high temperatures where I was getting these weird readings, and eventually the kiln would basically think it was too cold and turn the relays on full blast and keep them on. So it's trying to catch the temperature up. As soon as I stopped the kiln at that point, the relays turned off, and that's when the temperature jumped. So I figured there was probably some sort of connection between the relays being on and driving the elements and the temperature reading being off. So while the kiln was still pretty hot, I changed the software a little bit so it would only read the temperature when the relays were off. This actually seemed to fix the problem. The first couple readings are still a little bit off, they're a little bit low, but then very quickly it settles into what looks like the right temperature. So I think I found the problem. Basically something from the high voltage system, whether that's the relays and the control lines for them or the elements themselves, is causing some problems with the temperature sensor. It could also be just the proximity of all the high voltage lines to the thermocouple wire. Not sure exactly what's going on, but since there were some provisions already in the software for filtering noise, this may just be a normal thing. So nothing like fixing hardware with software. So I made the change so that no matter the duty cycle of the elements, no matter how much the PID controller wanted to turn them on, there was always a chance for it to turn off for a minimum amount of time. I also added a flag so the temperature sensor is only read when the relays are off. So what will happen is the controller will call for heat, it will turn the relays on, it will drive them for a while, and then they will turn off. When they turn off, the temperature sensor then kicks in and reads the temperature of the kiln. That is then used to decide how long the relay should turn on again, and that cycle continues over and over again. Even when the kiln is relatively too cold and it wants the elements on all the time, I added a small delay of about 1.5 seconds where the elements are off so I can get good temperature readings. The other thing I did is instead of switching from a rolling average, I actually wind up using the median temperature sensor. Since the first few values were off and most of the rest of them look good, I'm basically picking the one in the middle and using that as the temperature, as opposed to trying to combine them all together. So I think it's worth talking a little bit about these cones. So this is a cone 5, this is a cone 6, and this is a cone 7. And basically these are made up of magic ceramic dust. I don't actually know, but they melt at different cones. And the idea is that the cone 5 goes all the way down, the cone 6 bends most of the way, and the cone 7 just starts to bend. That means you get a good cone firing. This cone 6 may be a little bit light. It may be 5 3/4 or something like that, but it was really close. It was good enough, especially when I had to turn it off manually. In contrast, so this is the cone 5 for my cone 6 firing. This is the cone 5 for the overfire. It's just turned into a pool of molten, it looks like glaze actually. So it definitely got way too hot before. So I just did another full run of my kiln, and the graph looked perfect. I didn't see any jittering. It hit the temperatures just fine. I put some cones in the kiln as well and looked through the peephole and it looks good. I'll let the kiln cool down the rest of the way and double check to make sure the cones look good, just like the ones I did manually. I have very high hopes this time. And if that's the case, I actually now have a working kiln. I should be able to start putting pots in it and actually using it again. It's been a very long journey rebuilding it. I've been missing my kiln. My old Paragon kiln, I actually put out of service so I could have a place for my new bigger one. And I actually haven't been able to fire pots for quite a while. It's the next day. My kiln finished firing and it's cooled all the way down. The firing was completely successful. No anomalies in the temperature. So I'm very hopeful this time. Let's open it up and take a look. This looks great. So here are the 3 cones. This is cone 5, cone 6, and cone 7. I fired to cone 6. And reading the cone instructions, it says the kiln reached temperature when the cone is at the 5 o'clock position. So when it's leaned over and it's pointing at 5 o'clock. I think maybe this one just went a little bit past. The tip is just touching. So I think I just hit cone 6 or maybe just a tiny bit past. I suspected when I was firing manually that I may have undershot. So this actually looks really, really good. So overall, this is awesome. It means that my kiln was able to automatically get itself up to temperature and then turn itself off at the right time. All the temperature anomalies went away, the little weirdnesses in the graphs, it didn't shut down. I didn't go over temperature, any of those problems. So it seems like my kiln is now functioning. All of the work in rebuilding the kiln, changing out the elements, changing out the power electronics, changing out the control electronics, now means I have a digitally controlled kiln. Next up, I can actually start using it. I hope you found that interesting. If you have any questions, as always, please leave a comment below. Thanks.